I'm getting good at recording these in my car.
I know this. I think that is the second one in the row. You've been in your car. This is
Yeah,
this is good, but it's pretty awesome that we have this technology that you can actually sit in your
I know.
car and record a podcast.
Yeah, I did find some Wi-Fi, so I think I'm good there. But I'm in between meetings and across town, and it's just easier for me to podcast from the truck
Yeah,
than jumping back and forth. So
but we're
uh,
back on Friday.
we're sticking with it, and that's going good.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but like I'm excited because it's for me at least it's my off season, and it feels kind of good not to have a race right on on the schedule.
Yeah.
It actually kind of feels good. I know we that was our last podcast. We talked a lot about the off season. Actually, it's two
hmm
podcasts ago. We talked a lot about the off season. I'm really enjoying it right now.
Oh, that's good. Well, congratulations. And I know some people have a December race. I know Indian Wells is
Yep.
popular for local folks to go out to. But then after that, there really isn't anything until what would it be? I guess it would be March. People will start
Yeah.
going and racing again. So
Yeah. To actually do triathlons, yeah, not till March. No, like
yeah,
we talked about before, like I know people will be doing some running races. The turkey trots are coming up, and that's awesome.
yeah,
But for the most part, yeah, the triathlon season, at least for me, is over, and a lot of the people that I work with, it's over as well. And it's a much needed break. Yeah, it's good.
yeah. Good. Like we talked about before. I mean, this is a good time to sort of recalibrate, maybe dive into some topics that no one has time during the season to dive into.
Yeah.
And you came up with a good one for today.
Yeah, thanks. So when we were in Spain, and I've actually noticed this at a few recent races, and just in I don't know, the blogosphere of thought processes around triathlon and training that people are really pushing the idea of sodium, salt testing, sodium sweat rates. And I think that the marketing hype behind this is really strong. And there's a lot of influencers that are pushing this. And I don't think that the science is really very good. And the evidence behind doing this kind of testing and relating to actual performance is really quite poor. I know you spend a lot of time teaching this in your class, and I know I do too. And we teach it around neuromuscular efficiency and thermoregulation and all these things. And so, but anyways, this often happens, right? In our world of endurance sports, where we get marketed to all of the time,
Hmm
and it's up to us to be, I don't know, like educated consumers, and then for you and I in particular, like the people that we advise to make sure that we're all on the same page.
No, I love it. And let me just add something. I think there's good science on this. The
Yes,
problem is the marketing doesn't always match the science.
right, exactly. Yes.
But I do also agree, and this is where you're going, is there's also some bad science out there.
Yep.
And there's some science that we need to be really careful in interpreting. And one of those things, when you look at a paper on something like sodium intake and endurance performance or hydration, any of that, you've got to look and see who's sponsoring the work,
Yes.
because that is a critical part of understanding any inherent biases that may be showing in a particular paper.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you take a depth into a look at the history of this. Almost all of this has been, not almost all of it, but early on, a lot of the studies on this were sponsored by the companies that were selling the stuff,
Hmm
right? We know about like Gatorade Sports Science Institute. They were one of the really early groups that was publishing research in this area. We know that they have that group in particular has been sponsored by Gatorade, and not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, but it always should be, I don't know, our antennas should go up when we see stuff like that. And a lot of the once again, same with a lot of the other companies that are in this space is they're funding the research.
Yeah. No, and the issue with the funding is one of the threats to science is biases,
Yep.
and that's it's just good to look at what the conflict of interest is, and then the reader can decide
Yep.
whether or not there is a bias or not. But that is important. But another aspect of the science part, and I don't want I know this is going a little too far off in one direction, but
Okay.
um, the problem with some of the science on this type of topic in terms of sodium or hydration is the experimental design.
Right.
And often the way the experiments are designed is you take one big drink in whatever time period. You just guzzle it down. But that's not reality. And that's not how we race. And that we, take sips of things along the way, spread out over, 15-minute periods or whatever that is. And so sometimes what's happening in the experiment, which is a good way to control how fast the fluid is getting into the system, it's not necessarily reflective of practical experience.
Yep. Yep. So, John, have you had experience with actually doing salt testing?
I do not do salt testing, no, and I have not had my salt tested either, no.
Right. So when this is a kind of a relatively new thing that's been available to the general population, right? It's been a thing in exercise science for a while that we actually can measure the amount of basically salt lost in the sweat during exercise.
Yep.
But now it's been pushing to the public, right? Probably in the last 5 years, we've seen more and more companies that are trying to sell the ability to assess how much salt is in the sweat.
Mm-hmm.
And then to a next step, most of these companies, and then design a drink to try and match your sweat rate or your sodium sweat rate to what you're losing. So if I was if I was an athlete that was asking you about, what you thought about that, how would you respond?
It's an interesting thing, but you need to be careful with the data that you get because it can change day to day, it can change based upon environmental situations. But if you are able to get your sodium content of your sweat, that's good information, but you got to sort of scratch your head and say, that's good information for today. If I eat a different type of diet leading up to a race week, my sodium content, my sweat may be different, or other factors in terms of hydration status. So it's not something that I would pay a lot of money for. If it's free, I'll do it, but
Yeah.
it's not. But more as that's interesting, and maybe it does help with something, but it's so variable that it's a little hard to put your thumb on using those data.
Yeah. And I think that you're exactly right because we do know this like day-to-day variability of sodium content in sweat is huge.
Mhm.
If you, for example, I don't know, let's say you have a huge sodium diet one day without maybe even realizing, not necessarily trying, but there's some foods that are just inherently really high in sodium. The research that I've read shows that the next day your sodium concentration in your sweat will be higher.
Mhm.
It's interesting to me that a lot of people get this testing done maybe at a race. And
Yeah.
maybe they've sodium loaded, right? They've been really concentrating on their sodium, into the race. Well, then they're going to test, and it's going to show they actually have a really high sodium sweat rate,
Mhm.
and then they might make decisions based off of what they're intaking that are
Yeah.
actually driving even more sodium into the system.
Yeah.
And I think that is, like you said, it really there's a lot going on day to day. Maybe if we could test you every single day for a long period of time, it might tell you more.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would be neat. Again, it's neat information, but when something's so variable, now you got to figure out the factors that are influencing that. And even take a step back. I mean, we are talking about sodium,
Right.
not table salt.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and so I think that's an important factor. How much sodium is in table salt? Like 40%, or is it like
Yeah, I
half,
think
or
it's about
it's like
50
that?
50. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we just got to remember that we are interested in the sodium aspect of table salt, which is sodium chloride. So.
Yeah. The interesting thing I think is when we look at how much you sweat out in salt or sorry, sodium, is what does it mean? Like if
Hmm.
you and I were to race and we were to go do an Ironman, and you sweat sodium at this rate and I sweat sodium at this rate, let's add even more. Let's say we had 100 people. Would
Yeah.
it predict our finishing time in any way?
I would highly doubt it would.
I would highly, highly doubt it would.
Yeah.
I would even say that if we had one person that did 100 races and
Hmm.
we were able to look at their sodium rates, there would be no correlation to how much they sweat in sodium one day versus another and how they performed. I
Right.
think that's my hypothesis. What are your thoughts?
So, yeah, we can put people in different categories of high sweaters and high sodium sweaters and low sodium sweat. Um, but that's the output. That doesn't necessarily
Right.
tell you what's happening inside the body. So a
Exactly.
lot of times when you see people with, salt on their kid or what have you, you say, oh, they're a high salt sweater. They need more salt. That's not necessarily the case because it's what's inside the body, not necessarily what's going outside the body. I know that sounds odd, but if you have a high salt diet, you're gonna excrete a lot of sodium, either through sweat or through urine, and you're gonna get rid of that extra sodium because you don't need it. And so it is partly a function of your regular diet or what you ate last, actually, as well.
Yeah, and people don't think they realize how tightly regulated sodium is within the body.
That's right. Yeah,
Like
good
it's
point.
extremely tightly
Hmm.
regulated. Like
Yeah.
you have a little bit extra sodium, and like you mentioned as far as like urine, right? Like you're
Mhm.
going to urinate out more sodium. Your
Yeah,
body is very, very particular to sodium levels, and you've got to do a lot to drive it one way or the other.
that's right.
And in reality, once again, I don't think that there's that much actually going on. Now, that's not saying we're not talking about like hyponatremic states and
Hmm.
people that are drowning themselves with water.
Yeah.
That's another topic for another day. But in general, your body does a fabulous job at regulating sodium. It's actually one of those things that if you were to do blood tests kind of every day, sodium is one of the things that actually kind of stays almost identical.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
you're 139, you're 140, you're 139, you're 140, and it doesn't really vary. And look at so many of the other biomarkers, they actually move a lot, but
Hmm.
sodium is one of those ones that actually stays very, very flat
That's right. In the blood, and
in the
I
blood.
think that, and versus in the sweat, which is what your body's trying to get rid of the salt that you don't need. Uh,
Exactly. Exactly.
no.
Okay, so let's take this a step further and let's talk about in my mind, what I think is kind of like the backwards hypothesis of doing the sodium testing
Hmm.
is that the limiter in someone exercising or sodium levels while exercising is not, how much you sweat out of the system. The limiter with most people is how much you can bring in.
Hmm.
So would we, if I sweat a ton, let's say, of sodium, I can't necessarily bring in a ton of sodium because my body we have transporters in the small intestine that are their job is to actually facilitate the transport of sodium from basically whatever you drink into the system. Those things can become saturated. The way I always think about them is they're like the bouncer at a club, at a nightclub.
Hmm.
Eventually, the nightclub is like, "Hey, we're full. You have to wait outside."
Hmm.
And so the more people that are in line to get into the club, if they're full on the inside, you have too much, basically you have a lot of sodium already on the inside, no more is going to get in. Basically the transporters become saturated. And if it doesn't get into the system, it stays in the intestine and ultimately can cause bloating,
Hmm.
can cause diarrhea, can cause a lot of other negative things. The other situation is if you take something that's really has a high sodium concentration, we call that hypertonic. So if it's really a high concentration of sodium and you drink it, it'll actually take water from the inside of the body and bring it out into the small intestine. So you're driving water the wrong way. So
Hmm.
especially if you're concerned about, ingesting water as you exercise, bringing in too much sodium can actually be a negative thing for your hydration state. Does this sound right?
Oh, spot on. The salt intake is sort of like a U-shaped phenomena.
Right.
Too little salt is bad, and that's you mentioned hyponatremic,
Yep.
where you're actually diluting the system with fluid that you're taking in, and there's sodium losses, and you have too little salt in the system. That's bad. Too much salt is also bad, because as you said, it can draw water in. It can actually contribute to that bloated feeling that you have where the stomach can't empty, or you're pulling blood or fluids into the GI system as opposed to the other way around. And so you get that GI distress. And so there's this sweet middle ground
I,
that you've got to find,
yeah.
and of sodium intake. And that's sort of the challenge of trying to find what that range is.
Yeah. So the in my opinion, like the marketing hypothesis of you're sweating out a lot of sodium, so you need to ingest a lot of sodium.
No, yeah,
It doesn't work because
I
you're
agree. Yeah,
limited, but you're
yeah,
limited by the amount you can actually
yeah,
bring in. If you try and bring in too much more, you might actually make you sick.
yeah. And
And
you might already have too much salt in the system.
exactly.
You may already be on a high salt diet,
Yeah.
and all that's happening is your body saying, we don't need this. We're going to get rid of it. Oh, now we can sweat. Let's throw some more in sweat as opposed to just putting it in urine.
Exactly. And if we really think about it, what I would love to be able to measure is how much I can transport in,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we can't do that. It's not well, at least not right now. It's not a thing. Maybe one day in the future
Yeah.
we'll be able to do this, but right now you can't actually measure how much you get in. So then this becomes the problem, right? Like you were measuring, in my opinion, you're measuring the wrong thing
Mm-hmm.
when you're trying to come up with, well, what's the optimal amount of sodium to bring in when I'm racing? Measuring what you sweat out is the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, no, spot on. Yeah, and I would, and this is where you're going is, I want to know what's the right amount for me during exercise to have, and then can I match that loss with getting into that right range of sodium that I need in my body, versus overshooting or undershooting, and get into either of those areas, and that's where you can run into problems. I mean, this is why 80% probably, yeah, at the end of the day, it's probably everybody who has some type of GI problem during an iron distance event. And it's partly because you're not hitting the right amount of something.
Right.
And sodium is one of those somethings. It's not the causative factor, but it's just one of the pieces.
Yep. And I would say, at least in my experience working with the athletes that I've worked with, it's too much sodium.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They get so focused on that. And here is the next myth that I want to, and we've talked about this before. The myth is that lack of sodium in your body is what causes the muscle cramping
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and or causes muscular fatigue.
Right.
And it's simply not true.
Mm-mm.
There was a study, this is now 2 decades ago. They took professional tennis players, a bunch of them, I can't remember the exact numbers, but and they were measuring them as they were playing these tournaments, and they're measuring their blood sodium. There was absolutely no correlation to blood sodium levels and who
Yeah.
cramped and who didn't.
Right. Right.
Some people had high blood sodium, cramped. Some people had low blood
Mm-hmm.
sodium, cramped. Some
Mm-hmm.
people didn't. There was no correlation. This has been repeated in other sports. So this myth that sodium causes cramps or lack of sodium causes cramps is a problem. The
Mm-hmm.
same problem goes into hydration. So there's once again a myth that being dehydrated causes muscle cramps as well. Once
Mm-hmm.
again, this is a myth. There's been lots of research on this very phenomenon, and it's led people to drink too much, right? This is
Right.
the hyponatremic issue of, well, just drink a lot of water during your marathon or your Ironman or whatever, and you won't cramp. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's also not true. And so my thing would be, you were saying, well, trying to find that bell-shaped curve. Yeah, we just want to find this happy medium, not too much, not too little. And in my experience, it's actually pretty wide where you can be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, you don't have to be optimal with this one, right? I think
Yeah.
being optimal in carbohydrates is probably way, way, way more important
Mm-hmm.
than being optimal with your sodium intake.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and on the dehydration part, I mean, that is it's just such an interesting history with that. In that early, 1900s, early, um, people were running marathon with no water
Yep.
intake. And that was part of the allure of marathon, is to not take anything in. And now we've got marathons that have aid stations every mile.
Right.
And if you don't get one, you miss one at mile 3, it's like, oh, complain, complain. We need that hydration or whatever it is. And so there has been a lot of marketing on the need to drink,
Yep.
and not only for hydration but also for sodium, and that is probably a lot marketing more so than physiology.
Yeah, 100%. So, one of the things that I did as I was preparing for this talk was I reached out to every athlete that I coach and some people that I used to coach as well. And I was like, I wanted to know for the
All right, a little bit of technical issue
yeah,
there.
so part B. So we're talking
Ah,
about as I prepared for this, I reached out to all of the people that I coach and some of the people that I used to coach, and I just asked them the question like, what are you drinking on course for long course triathlon? Like what's your plan as far as what's the brand you use, and have you thought about the sodium content potentially? And then I started looking at what the sodium content was. And then I kind of followed up with a few of them, like, well, are you like watering it down? Like so, because they're mixing powders. Like, are you making sure that you match up with what one serving is? Some people were watering it down, some people weren't. But the interesting thing is, out of the people that I reached out to, every single person had a different plan.
yeah. Hmm.
And it's not something that I've given a lot of, instruction to people on because I think it's really people are they're kind of like it's almost religious what they intake. And I start thinking, why is it so different? Like, why are people like, this person is drinking Gatorade, this person is drinking Scratch, this person is drinking Morton, this person is drinking whatever. And I really wanted to like, try and figure this out. And a lot of it comes down to, well, maybe they like the taste. So they have something that it actually tastes good to them. That's important.
Hmm.
And or somehow, some way they were marketed to buy whatever that they're buying. And I started looking at it, and the interesting thing is most of them were very much in the middle as far as being relatively, we call it isotonic. So
Hmm.
very similar to what their normal blood sodium would be, which I think is good. But a few of them were really hypertonic in that they were taking an isotonic drink and then adding sodium to it. So there's a company, we're just gonna say names because we don't care. Element, they sell, the little packages of sodium or of electrolytes basically.
Hmm.
So they were taking a drink that was already like a normal sports drink, and they were adding another package of basically sodium to it.
Yeah.
And when I followed up and asked, like, what's the thought process? Oh, well, I think I sweat a lot, so I need to add even more. And then you look at it and it's very hypertonic.
Hmm.
And I think that that's maybe a common error that people are making is more, I just need to add more sodium to the system. And so that's going to, as I start advising these people and moving forward, I'm going to really be pushing for like isotonic levels of sodium. So, somewhere kind of in the middle, like exactly what you said, like let's shoot for the big part of the bell curve. And I think we're going to ultimately be more successful. And whatever brand it is trying to find that happy range. What are your thoughts around that?
So that's so cool to hear. And this is what's so hard about endurance sports in particular is getting the nutrition right. And I use sodium as part of the nutrition
Right.
plan, if you will. Trying to get that, that plan correct is really, really hard. You walk into a store, sports or any store, and you look at all the different options you have for what to take,
Yep.
from whatever, solids to liquids to powders to whatever. And it's really difficult to understand what the plan should be. But if we take a step back and just think about some of the basic physiology, that's where you have to start. Now, I teach the physiology on this, and I've had problems, and they're debilitating often with GI problems. And so, then you try something else. And so even though there's the research out there and there's this knowledge, this science, there still is individuals, and the individual matters, especially in this case, because my regular diet is going to impact what type of nutrition plan I should have during a race, my intensity that I race at, the physiology of keeping my core temperature what it should be in terms of how much sweat I sweat. That you've talked about absorption. All these things will come back into play in terms of what you need to take in during, before, during, and even after an event. And it's hard to get right. And even when you get it right and you say, oh, I nailed that plan at race X, and I'm going to repeat that plan for the next race, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because something else has happened. And it's this is such a multifactorial problem. It's hard to nail, but the more you learn, the more you try to zero in on it, the better you're doing. I mean, that's the best you can do at that point. But it's a hard problem to solve.
Well, you added that one time it might work and one time it might not, and something that I think when we've talked about this before as well is the environment changes.
Yeah, that's right.
So when we were in Spain, even between the men's race and the women's race, there was probably, I don't know, almost a 10-degree difference on the road.
Hmm.
Well, so I'm running at 60, it's probably 65 degrees when I was running.
Yeah.
I'm not taking in very much during that.
Hmm. That's right.
I raced in Waco a month earlier, and it was one of the hottest races I've ever done.
Mm.
I actually walked, I never walk aid stations. I walked several aid stations just so I could make sure to get enough in,
Yeah.
right? Well, those are two different plans.
Hmm.
Like they have to be two different plans for the amount of fluid I'm getting in, potentially the amount of even sodium I might be trying to ingest.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's kind of really interesting, and as I was researching for this talk, one of the companies was saying, well, the hotter it is, the more sodium you need to take in. But without understanding the physiology is the hotter it is, the more your gastrointestinal system doesn't take stuff in.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
more blood gets shunted away from your gastrointestinal system into your skin to cool you. So
Yeah.
if you try and take in more, but your body is not putting resources towards your intestine, you could cause even more problems. So these are, like you said, it's a very complex physiologic problem.
Hmm.
And where I'm getting at with this is, and the advice that I'm giving the people now is, let's find that bell curve. Let's find what in
Yeah.
general is going to work, and let's not try to optimize sodium.
Hmm.
Much rather, I want to spend my time optimizing carbohydrate because
Hmm.
we do know that lack of carbohydrate is going to absolutely affect performance,
Yeah.
right? I still don't know if lack of sodium is going to influence
Hmm.
performance.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I love it. I think those are good conversations to have, and a lot of people will be even questioning, well, how much sodium are we actually talking about? What is, a way to describe the amount of sodium you need? It's like a pinch of table salt in a bottle is probably getting you enough sodium, and you got to start with that before you go off in the extremes, either more or less. But I mean, you're literally talking about a pinch of salt.
Yep.
You
Yep.
grab that, throw that in your water bottle. That's the amount of salt, which gives you the amount of sodium that is a good place to start. And then, figuring out if you need more or less from that, you start there.
Yep. So I'll never forget this. I went to a talk several years ago, and a person that was doing research in this area, a lot of it really good research in this area. And it was with those same tennis players. And when they were actually measuring, they were measuring sweat rate. And he was basically saying that in the average, like elite tennis player, the amount of sodium they were losing in their sweat was equal to about 16 bottles of Gatorade an hour of
Hmm.
sodium.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Right.
you're
Right.
losing so much
Yeah.
that you can't possibly replace it. But
Hmm.
it doesn't necessarily, once again, influence what's happening physiologically with your performance.
Hmm.
And I think you've mentioned it several times. What you eat day to day is way, way, way more important.
Hmm.
And making sure that as endurance athletes, we're continually, uh, you know, salting our foods.
Mm-hmm.
And especially during the summer, you're doing a lot of outdoor training, you're doing, that's probably way more important than what you take in on the day.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think that's also a good message because in our society, we vilified salt,
Mm-hmm.
right? You and I, we've been to sushi several times, and you have to almost ask now for the regular soy sauce instead of the low sodium,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we see these low sodium diets all over the place. And I get it. Like as a society, low sodium might be a relatively good thing, especially when we're dealing with people that are hypertensive or have high blood pressure. But for us in the endurance world, I don't think it should not be vilified.
Mm-hmm.
And a healthy diet is not a low sodium diet for endurance athletes.
Yeah, no, sodium's critical for nerve conduction, muscle contraction,
Yeah.
maintaining homeostasis in the body, pH level, all this. And sodium, when we start thinking about taking in sodium, we're also thinking about taking in potassium,
Right.
because they work in pairs, if you will. So you do need potassium as well as sodium. Um, but yeah, it's a tough nut to crack, but I agree with you. There's a lot of information out there that doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. Now, there are some people who need high sodium intake,
Oh, for sure.
but the vast majority of people probably don't. And so, but it is that, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? It's usually a GI problem.
Yeah.
And if they're having a GI problem, trying to go through, sodium intake makes a lot of sense to analyze that. I think a lot of people need to stop and really measure and understand sweat rate, because without that information, you're not actually getting the full picture about how to set up your nutrition plan.
Yeah, sweat rate, but not necessarily sodium rate.
That's right. Right. Right.
So we're talking about the amount of fluid lost,
Mm-hmm.
not just the amount of sodium. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. And then once again, sweat rate is so variable as well.
Mm-hmm.
I can get on my trainer in my house right now. It's like, 70 degrees in my house or 65 degrees in my house.
That's right.
And that is going to be completely different than if
Yep.
I go outside in the summer at 110 degrees.
Yep.
And it's only relevant to the exact situation you're in.
Mm-hmm. No,
And
and
I think it's
and it
super
goes back
important.
to, yeah, no, and it goes back to what you said earlier, even like measuring sodium that's in sweat. I mean, you got to measure sweat rate many times, and to try to get a sense for when you are racing in certain conditions, you say, okay, this is probably about what my sweat rate is, and that's how I'm going to plan my nutrition plan.
Well, the other thing I think, and this is the last thing I want to add, is just because you sweat at a certain rate does not mean you have to replace it.
Oh gosh, no,
And
yes,
and
yeah,
I think that's once again a myth is like, okay, because it's really easy to measure sweat rate. We've talked about it
hmm
before. You weigh yourself, you go run for an hour outside, weigh yourself again. As long as you didn't go to the bathroom, didn't drink
yeah,
it, and you didn't really drink anything, you could tell how much you sweat,
yep,
right? But we also do know that you should lose some weight as you exercise. In
hmm
fact, if you gain weight while you exercise, that's a recipe for hyponatremia and really bad outcomes.
yeah,
And that, when I think about it in like a half Ironman, I'm probably going to honestly lose 4 to 6% of my body weight by the time I get to
hmm
the end.
yep,
And that is, in my mind, an acceptable loss for me because I've been able to perform at that, and I've measured that during a race
hmm
approximately because I couldn't always tell exactly how much I brought in.
yeah,
I think that's also an important piece is to understand that you can lose a percentage of your body weight. And we used to think, oh, well, 2% was kind of the magic number, and losing more than 2% was a problem. And really, we're seeing with the elite athletes, some are losing up to 10% of their body weight by the time they finish some of these endurance
hmm
events, and they're okay. Like they're not in as
yeah,
severe dehydration, and they're still performing relatively well near the end. And these are elites.
yep. No, spot on. In fact, if we end up the same body weight at the end of a race as in the beginning, we've taken in too much
Yeah.
fluid or fuel, what have you. And that's the way I always explain it in class. I say, if I get my truck and I go to a scale, I weigh my truck, and I got a full tank of gas. And if I drive 6 hours and then I weigh my truck again, it's going to weigh less.
And it should. It better.
Yeah, better. Yeah, well, because it's a gas truck.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's going to weigh less. Why? Because the gas got used as a fuel to power the engine.
Yep.
And so the same thing happens in the body, is that when we run a marathon, part of our weight loss is loss of fuel, carbohydrates, and fats.
Yep.
And so if we end up the same weight, we are simply taking on extra weight, or we've actually taken on extra fluid, and we end up are just carrying extra weight in that race.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, John, I think we did a good job of covering this today. So that
Yeah.
was really good. Thank you so much for meeting with me when you're in your car.
Yeah. Hopefully I can stitch the two videos together.
Yeah,
So,
if not, we can have an A and B. So
yeah, that's right. That's
well,
right.
for those of you that listen to the second half, thank you so much for listening to the second half. And I'm assuming we might take a week off next week because we have Thanksgiving coming up.
Yeah, that's right.
So have a happy Thanksgiving to you and to everyone that listens.
Yeah.
And we'll get back going after the holiday.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay, thanks, John.
All right. Talk soon.